Hey guys, it's Goosebumps Completionist, and today I'm bringing you another book review from the House of Shivers book series, and it's book number 2, Goblin Monday. Now, a lot of you might be saying, hey Completionist, you got the book in early again. Yes, I know, but like last time and the times before that, my local bookstore puts out these books sometimes weeks in advance. In this case, it was exactly a week. So I managed to get my hands on a copy before a lot of you out there probably will, at least at the time of me making this video. And because my reviews work best if you've already read the book before, you should probably come back to this video after you read this, just to hear my thoughts on it. So you've been warned. With that out the way, I have to say that this book surprised me in a lot of ways, and I came out really enjoying this one. So in case you were wondering, hey Completionist, did you like Goblin Monday? I really did. So far, I don't mean to jinx anything, but these past 3 books, Fright Night, Scariest Book Ever, and Goblin Monday, has to be my favorite run of moderns I've come to in a while, where you just have 3 very solid books back to back to back, all for different reasons and in different ways. This one definitely fits that bill. If you are a fan of some of the more darker Goosebumps stories, this might do it for you. However, if you're used to Series 2000 and the descriptions on like body horror and violence, you get a smidge of that in here, but not a lot of it. It is still that toned down modern Goosebumps, so it's not going to be that comparative to some of those great ultra violent, ultra disturbing, ultra grisly in imagery classic books out there. But this definitely like weirdly pays an homage to those. This definitely fits into that darker modern era kind of book. So if you're looking forward to this, it does have some issues though. It does have some issues. And we'll get into that as we go. It could have been probably one of the best Goosebumps books of all time without these issues. But then again, I could say that about a lot of these. So off my recommendation, please go check out Goblin Monday. You need to try this one out, especially if you haven't read a modern before, or maybe you're curious about the House of Shivers series. Honestly, I think this might be a better book to jump on than the first book. Just because, you know, in terms of quality, it's kind of similar, but this one definitely has that old school Goosebumps flair in its veins. So yeah, let's get into the plot overview without giving too much away. All right. So the main character of the story is Mario, and Mario is a transplant kid. His family has up and moved to Philadelphia. He's from Key West, Florida, and he finds himself on winter break from school, but his parents have decided to go on a trip without him, and they left him in the care with his neighbors known as the Sims family. And the Sims, you know, they have 2 loving parents and they have 2 kids, Todd and Jewel, and they have decided to bring Mario along during winter break up to Vermont to visit the Sims family's grandparents that live up there. And Mario is super excited because he comes from Key West, Florida. It never snows in Key West, and this is the first time he ever gets to experience snow live and in color. He's prepared himself by watching YouTube videos on how to build a snowman and how to build snowballs and all that. So he's excited just to have a wintry getaway. And he's heard lots of fun stories from Todd and Jewel about their grandparents, and he can't wait to meet them as well. So throughout the car ride, they're having some banter, but they, that's not really important stuff. The book pretty much off the bat starts characterizing these characters in a fun way. But you end up in Vermont and you get this nice little cozy atmosphere of kind of like an isolated cabin in the woods type of area where they have like, just a settlement, some sparse houses, and then dense forest everywhere, like a mountainous community would have. And when they arrive, there's about a foot of snow, and Mario touches snow for the first time in his life, and he's mesmerized by it. But then the family decides to bring him inside to meet the grandparents, and the grandparents welcome everybody with open hugs, and the grandmother, known as Mom, and the grandpa is named Grandpa Tweety. They have prepared dinner for the family, and they made this really nice stew and some, dippable bread, and everybody's enjoying the food. Mario seems to think that the cooking is amazing. And then after they eat, they get to notice what's, down nearby the kitchen and in the living room of the home. There's like this floor-to-ceiling bird cage that belongs to Grandpa Tweety. And the reason why his name is Tweety is because he loves bird watching, and he's also like an author that writes fantasy stuff. So he has weird stories about goblins, elves, imps, gremlins, stuff like that. And Todd and Jewel talk up his stories as they're really fun to listen to. Now, once Mario sees the bird cage, he starts asking questions about the birds and all that, and then they finally sit down. All the kids sit down to listen to one of Grandpa Tweety's stories, and he tells the story of an imp that suddenly appeared last week in his home, and he caught him trying to take a bath in the washing machine, and he left behind one of these leather jackets, and he points over in the corner, and there's like a very small leather jacket. So Mario starts to question if these stories are true, and he asks Todd and Jewel if the imp story is true, and they're like, yeah, he's just telling stories. But there's also a mention while they're at dinner that there might be goblins out in the garden. And Mario takes this like, okay, well, the imp jacket is there. Well, let me see if these goblins are real. So he looks outside with his camera because he's like, I should mention this now. He brought with him a few items. He brought with him like a really nice camera, not like a cell phone camera, but like a camera that an avid photographer would take with them along with their, trips and whatnot. He's brought that, and then a leaf blower because that was his favorite childhood toy, and because his father owned a hardware store back in Florida, and the kids find him weird to bring a leaf blower, but they just file on the back of their brains, I guess, and the leaf blower is not touched on till way later in the book. But anyway, so Mario is pointing his camera outside the window, and he thinks that he sees this goblin, and especially once the cat named Firefly, it's like this little black cat, starts hissing and pouncing at the door. And Mario is like, okay, well, something might be wrong here. There might be a goblin out there. And he goes outside to investigate, and lo and behold, he finds a cut-up rabbit. And it's pretty grisly how the book describes it. Like, the rabbit wasn't eaten or anything, but it's like stomach was cut open. And blood was everywhere. Yeah, the book goes like that with animal violence. But the next day, he goes outside to investigate more because he thought he saw a creature that might look like, what was being described by Grandpa. And the rabbit was gone. And he's like, okay, well, this is strange. And he thinks that he has this encounter with some goblins, or a goblin, I should say. And he's really worried about that. And also, around this time of the story, he can't sleep at night because of what he witnessed with the rabbit the night before. And he goes downstairs, and he sees Grandpa Tweety inside of this floor-to-ceiling bird cage acting very strange with some birds. So he starts to say that he encountered encountered one of these goblin creatures that Grandpa Tweety was talking about. And the kids kind of shrug him off, like, oh, come on, stop pulling our chains. He's like, no, I got attacked by one. I tried to take a picture of it, and he actually took a snapshot, but inside of the snapshot, there was nothing there. And they're like, oh, you took a picture of nothing. He goes, no, I swear something was there. You have to believe me. If not, I'm going to find a way for you to believe me. So he spends the rest of this story here, from this point on, trying to find ways to prove himself. And then he comes up with this idea that if Grandpa Tweety knows about these things, he has to know the truth. So he decides that maybe it would be best to kind of snoop around the rest of the house to see if there's any clues. And he recruits Todd and Jewel because at this point of the story, Todd and Jewel's parents have disappeared. Like, they legit just disappear in the plot because they go out for a walk one morning and they never come back. And they disappeared on the same morning when Grandpa Tweety, I kind of skimmed over this part, but they took him out to like go bird watching or something. So they're actually out of the story. And they go snooping around and they find Grandpa Tweety's collection room, and there's a bunch of bird feed everywhere, like of all these dead pet birds that he keeps around. It's really creepy. Then they go into Mom's room, and they find some pictures, like a photo album, and inside the photo album they look like these goblin creatures that Mario has saw, and they're all acting like humans would. And then they get interrupted once they look inside of this closet, and they find a bunch of green knit sweaters and like pant legs that seem to be in the photo album of all these goblin creatures that they saw. And they asked the question, like, what are these for? And she's like, oh, these were trial and error things, don't worry about it. It's just me running out of yarn, and I like the color green. Just trying to like BS the kids, right? But the kids notice that there's holes on the back of the shorts. And Mario's like, well, why is there a hole? And he's starting to think that, oh, it has to be for like a goblin's tail or whatnot, right? And I've kind of already skimmed over a lot of things, but I should also mention this. There is a scene where Mario has a dream sequence where he thinks he sees an imp, and that kind of plays into all this too. I don't know why I'm telling you this now, but it's going to play a role later on in my review in the later portion of this video. But yeah, there was a fake out dream sequence with him seeing an imp that kind of plays into his suspicion that these supernatural creatures might be real, right? So Mario's at the point where he's got like these semi-prophetic dreams about imps and these stories that, Grandpa Tweety has been sharing. There's circumstantial evidence that has led him to believe that he has to follow Grandpa Tweety himself. The kids are a lost cause to convince. He's going to have to put all this into his own shoes. So he brings out his camera and tries to spy on Grandpa Tweety one morning. And Grandpa Tweety is out there with his like bird log looking at some birds one morning, but he sees the grandpa eat a bird, and he hears the bones crunch, and the way the book writes that is really gross. And he freaks out. And then after that, while he's hiding there trying to keep quiet because he's so disturbed, one of the goblins come up to Grandpa, and they have like a stare down, and he tries to snap a photo of the goblin, but he catches the goblin's attention, and the goblin chases after him, grabs him in a menacing way, and smashes his camera. Now, this is the part of the story I should mention where early on, I've been kind of vague with a few things. There was some pendants given out to the entire family, and when they went to go look, investigate around the home, they also went to Todd and Jules' missing parents' room, and they left behind these pendants that are said to carry nutmeg inside of them because that's supposed to warn off the goblins. And they left them behind, so they think that maybe the goblins, well, at least Mario seems to think that maybe the goblins got to them because they've been missing and there's no update, right? So Mario convinces Todd and Jewel that something might be wrong because these pendants were left behind, and they mildly buy into it, and they start prodding around the grandparents a little more, and they say, well, hey, we'll go out and look for them. Why don't you go out sledding? And then there's a whole scene in the book that's pretty much filler here where they go out sledding, and they spend a few chapters out on this big old hill sledding down the snowy slopes. I guess Stein decided to put this in here for padding and atmosphere. It really adds nothing to the story, but at the end of it, after almost getting hurt, this makes them feel like they have to go back home in an urgent way and kind of sleep off some things. And the next day, they asked, were they able to find the parents? And they said no. So Mario's like, look, something's up with Grandpa Tweety. Something's up with the bird cage. There's some birds that were mentioned early on that are missing, and they don't seem to remember it. And so he starts asking around at breakfast about the birds with Todd, and Todd kind of mentions it, and he's like, okay, well, something's off here. Starts to go further down his own spiral in his head, where he gets this idea that enough's enough. He's going to have to like capture a goblin. And he makes up his mind, and he decides to sneak out the next morning on Goblin Monday. Hence why the book is called Goblin Monday, because the title of the chapter, the point of the story, is called Goblin Monday. He sneaks out one morning. He sees one of the goblins, and he sees this tarp covering a chair. He decides to try to trap it, but it fails. But he still manages to wrestle it up and put it inside the house, inside of a closet, somehow. And he gets the attention of the grandparents and Todd and Jewel. And then the climax happens. You get a realization twist of the goblin, their involvement nearby the home and in the forest, and you get answers to some breadcrumbs dropped in the story. I'm going to be very vague here because it's very easy to spoil the story here. You also find out what happened to Todd and Jules' parents, and then again, you get another twist. So this is a book that has a double-decker twist, and it involves Mario, and I'll leave it there. And Mario has a huge recontextualization moment for his character that completely shifts the narrative of the entire book. It completely shifts it, and you learn why he brought certain things with him, let's just say. And it leads to the ending of it, when you think that the story is over. There's a very dark twist involving Mario's character, and I'll just leave it at that. If you've read Werewolfskin, it's kind of similar to that, but that's as far as I'll go. And yeah, that's in a nutshell Goblin Monday. Okay, so let's start off with the positives of this book because I have quite a few here. Off the bat, I think the setup to this story is very refreshing, even though we kind of had this fantastical setup in other Goosebumps books of the past with snowy climates and all that. Even in the book before this, Scariest Book Ever, still had that fantastical woods atmosphere going. But this one felt more refreshing because at the beginning, you're kind of seeing some similarities to former classic Goosebumps books like How to Kill a Monster. And then you start to see notes that kind of feel like Revenge of the Lawn Gnomes and some other urban legend type of Goosebumps stories that you've seen in the past. But it's actually its own refreshing idea. This is actually one of Stein's more unique ideas I've seen come out of him in the past 15 years from this series. So for that, it definitely wins me over because it feels like its own story. It's not trying to be like something else. Even though there's parts of the story that you can kind of compare to other books, it's still its own thing, and I can really applaud it for that. Mario as a main character is written with a very deep monologue, and there's some really big swings I can see Stein doing with trying to characterize his character. There's certain little thought things that he inserts in the book that make it seem refreshing to read. It makes Mario more engaging, and I would say that kind of builds on to even the secondary characters. For once in a Goosebumps book, during its slower build-up in the first 50 or so pages, there's a lot of characterization building going on with these side characters as well, with the grandparents and Todd and Jewel. The only characters that don't really get any attention is Todd and Jewel's parents. But other than that, the main characters of the story that we do get to spend a lot of time with, you get to know a good bit about them in that first 50 pages, and I can really appreciate it for that. And it honestly felt like a slice of life, even though it got a little too much of that, and I'll get into that in the negatives. But yeah, great character setup, and it's kind of easy to love and hate these characters at the same time because they do have their annoyances, which I'll also get into in the negatives. But even when they're annoying, you can kind of forgive them. And I kind of applaud Stein for making characters dynamic in that way, where you can dislike certain things about them, but also still weirdly like them. So that was cool. I think the atmosphere was great. I love the snowy setting. The concepts of the monsters were great. The goblins, the titular goblins that you see on the cover here, are legitimately tense and creepy. Okay, there's some scenes involving these goblins, y'all, especially pushing near the end of the book, and given the context of other things that happen in the story, they are not willing to commit animal violence and or human violence. So that caught me off guard. There's bloodshed in this book from an animal. I should go ahead and say this. The ending is so warped. I love it. It's easily the darkest ending I've read in Goosebumps in quite some time. So metal horns for that, Stein. Good job there. Yeah, it had some dark moments in this book, and I was not expecting it. Like I said before, though, it doesn't get too graphic and descriptive with it like its former predecessors of other series like Series 2000 or even Original 62 for that matter. There are some mild transformation scenes in this book. that just don't have that description that the former books have. But still, it's the implications in the tone that deliver the darkness, and that's what makes it really excel on that front. The book was intriguing. The story had me gripped, especially after that 50-page mark and the story really starts to kick on. There was a legitimate mystery going on, and while you can kind of predict where the book is going to go in terms of an angle dealing with the goblins, I should say, and how that pertains to the Sims family, but you don't see where it's going to go, and that's what makes it fun. It's not predictable like you would think it would be, and it has a bunch of twist and turn moments that were fun. So yeah, it's a very, very solid book. Not without its flaws, though. Not without its flaws. And I'll go ahead and bring up the first one. The first 50 pages, while it is setting up these characters, while it is setting up what's going to come later on in the story, most of it is just boring. It's nothing happening plot-wise. It's just, it leans too much into the slice of life for my liking, because it kind of stalls the progression of the book. And there's also this issue that's getting into my second negative. There's two specific things that happen in this book that stick out like sore thumbs, and it's just bona fide filler padding that I just cannot excuse. The first thing is that dream sequence I mentioned in the plot overview that Mario had about an imp. None of that is ever played up for anything in the story. It's just there to be there. And the second thing is the whole sledding adventure down that hill that the kids were talking about with Mario. That's all filler. This book is 146 pages. You could have trimmed out 26 of this easily. Quite a few chapters of filler. You didn't need that in there. It kind of got in the way of the story at certain points, and I made my eyes roll a little bit. My third negative with it is once you get over that 50-page hurdle and you start getting into the more meat of the mystery and all that, there are some things about Todd and Jules' characters that are absolutely frustrating. And it involves these unfortunate, pretty much contrived scenarios that Mario finds himself in, where he takes a picture, but the picture doesn't develop an image on the camera. His camera breaks. I actually skipped over a whole scene where he tries to bring them to, spy on Grandpa, and he sees Grandpa eat a bird again, right? But they are busy looking at wild turkeys. And he's like, I give up. And literally, that's how I felt, too. I'm like, I give up with these characters. They become annoying and pretty much plot liabilities, or, just for the sake of plot contrivances at one point. And it gets in the way of me kind of liking their characters. It's like, come on, Stein. Can you please write them in a realistic way and stop writing these far-flung scenarios just to trot the story along? It got old. And it happened quite a few times. And when it happens that many times, like 3 or more, it becomes annoying. And that's why it's a negative here. Another negative I have, oh my lord, is the final 10 pages of this book. The recontextualization moment with Mario at the end is so not expected. And I'm not saying that it's not expected, therefore bad off the bat. No, it's not expected in the way that it completely takes away from all the other events of the story, and it shifts the whole narrative in a new light. So now you're supposed to kind of dislike Mario when he was easily the most likable character out of this entire book. And that frustrates me. I don't like that tonal shift. I don't like the direction there, even though it's kind of fun. I can kind of see the appeal there, and some of you might like it more than I do. But nah, not for me. Not for me at all. And yeah, with all those negatives adding up, it did take away a good amount of this book for me. I wanted to say that this book was an A tier because, while I went over a lot of the stuff that happened in this book, the villains were so violent and the tone was kind of dark and the mystery was enthralling. The character writing was pretty good. This had a lot of A-tier qualities, but those issues just added up and added up and added up into more annoyance territory that it made me not want to give this book an A. As a matter of fact, there's one thing that's actually preventing me from giving this like a C. Now, the original score I wanted to give this was a 3.9 out of 5 stars, which is a C plus. But I decided to give this a B. Here's why. The ending is so dark, especially for modern Goosebumps standards. This might be like a knee-jerk reaction to some former books, you can call it that. But the fact that Stein was willing to go dark and, in a time, especially given what we got in Slappy World, which had a bunch of goofy endings that weren't meant to be taken seriously, or they're so left field that they're just awful, this one was done pretty smart. And because of that ending, being as metal as it was, I decided to bump this one up to a B. And I decided to give this one a lower B, but it's still congruent in quality, like I said, with Fright Night and with Scariest Book Ever. And I decided to give this book a 4.1 out of 5 stars. This is a B minus, but it's definitely an above average, very good Goosebumps book. I highly recommend that you go check this out immediately once this book releases, and let me know if you like it, please. So yeah, that's my thoughts on Goblin Monday. Like I said, let me know if you like this book when you read it. Did you love it? Did you hate it? Did you dislike it? Whatever the case may be, I'm dying to know. And I'll see you next time.